Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, in the wake of the Hastert sentencing, some people are not happy. Well, I'm one of them. Who does not think that justice was done in the case.
I'd like to go on record saying I concur.
More was done by the judge than by federal prosecutors in sort of a rare instance where Judge Durkin, in this case, the federal judge who presided over the Hastert matter, imposed a sentence 1.5 times what was recommended as part of a plea agreement by federal prosecutors. So that was encouraging, but he could have gone further. It could have been more. He could have
been up
maxed
to
him out.
5 years. Right. That's what I was expecting. The way he was talking in court and talking about which prison he wants him to go to, Rochester, Minnesota, where there's a level 4 federal prison where he can have medical treatment. And I thought for sure he was going to throw the book at him, give him 5 years, and 15 months was just not enough.
How about forcing him to relinquish his federal pension so he don't have to suffer the further indignity of having a serial child molester, as Judge Durkin called Denny Hastert, being financed in his golden years and prison years by taxpayers? Well, we had famed constitutional lawyer Alan Dershowitz on the show a few weeks back, and it's always fun to talk to him because he's legal genius. And so it's always great. And we went back and forth on this matter of should you sentence for the underlying crime that you can't prosecute, the sexual molestation, in the context of sentencing for the crime that Denny Hastert actually pled guilty to, which is the more mundane, illegal structured withdrawals of money from his bank accounts to pay off the deal that he had struck with one of his victims. Well, now it's time to revisit that. And I dared to disagree with Alan Dershowitz on that. And I am not contrite about it. But we'll see if Alan Dershowitz has changed his view on the matter at all in light of the sentencing that Hastert received. Joining us now, Alan Dershowitz, former professor at Harvard Law School, famed constitutional attorney. Professor Dershowitz, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. There's a famous conversation between the great Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and one of his law clerks. The law clerk says, "Mr. Justice, the decision you rendered is not justice. It wasn't just." And Holmes says, "Young man, we're not in the justice business. We're in the law business." And so there is a difference between ultimate justice and whether the law was followed. And in this case, look, if he was a serial child molester, then the sentence probably, he should have served a long time in prison. It would have been better if he had been caught early and been able to be prosecuted. But the law imposes statutes of limitations for good reason. And when the statute of limitations are over, generally the person should not be punished for what he is alleged to have done over the period of the statute of limitations. What the judge did here was to say, look, I'm not going to punish you just for the structuring. That would be a misdemeanor. In effect, that would be a less serious crime. I'm going to look back to what you actually did. So maybe what the judge did was just, but I think it raised real questions about whether what he did was lawful.
Well, the other thing, I want to go back to something you said about statute of limitations, because the other thing that the statute of limitations has raised is a question of should we have a statute of limitations for those accused of child molestation, because we know how devastating those crimes are on children and how long it takes many to come to terms with what happened to them. That was certainly the case with Denny Hastert. And so speak to the purpose.
That's a good question.
Speak to the purpose of statute of limitations.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. We have statute of limitations for virtually every crime except murder. And if the legislature wants to change the statute, and some jurisdictions have, they've said that the statute doesn't begin to run until the person becomes 21 or until the person realizes what's happened. So there's a lot of flexibility about changing the statute of limitations, but you have to change statute of limitations prospectively for the future. You can't change them and change the past. That would be in violation of what's called the ex post facto law of the Constitution. So this is a complicated case. It's also unusual for a judge to go beyond what the prosecutor recommends, and the judge did that in this case. Look, the O.J. Simpson case raised a similar question. Remember, he was convicted of a relatively minor offense in Nevada and sentenced to a humongous prison term because the judge, in effect, was saying, look, you got away with murder in California. I'm going to give you an extra punishment for that murder, which we think you did because of what you did in in Nevada. And that raises the question. Al Capone, he was charged with tax evasion, but he wasn't sentenced for tax evasion. He was sentenced for everything else everybody thought he did during his reign of terror. So these are very hard jurisprudential, moral, legal questions. And in the end, what Hastert was accused of doing was terrible. The other issue that this case raises is, was Hastert himself a victim of an extortion, or was this really a settlement of a case? And, the line between extortion and secretly settling a case is often a subtle one, too, because the victim, and there were real victims here, might threaten to go public and get a better settlement to try to keep the matter private.
Yeah, but Judge Durkin settled that because Dennis Hastert tried to re-victimize the victim. So when the feds went to Denny Hastert, and this is what I found out in court yesterday, he said, "Oh no, he's forcing me to pay him." So then they wired up Dennis Hastert, and as it turned out,
right,
there was a verbal agreement that Dennis Hastert had between himself and individual A.
And prosecutors concluded there was no extortion.
Yeah, they're absolutely, and he agreed.
I think that sounds like a fair conclusion based on the evidence in the case. But you have to be, these kinds of cases are very, very difficult. And look, for whatever you say about Hastert, and what he did was absolutely horrible, using his trust as a coach. He's an old man. He's an invalid. He's a sick man. He's been disgraced. There's no punishment that's worse than the kind of disgrace that he suffered. And now he'll probably go to Rochester and spend much of his time under hospitalization and probably be released in 12 or 13 months and will disappear ignobly into history for what people now believe he did years and years and years ago. But the statute of limitations issue is a difficult one because, we are forgiving people, and statute of limitations basically say you're not going to be having that sort of Damocles hanging over you for the rest of your life. But for certain crimes, we do hang that sort of Damocles over you for the rest of your life. And so legislatures should have the power to think hard about how to deal with statute of limitations for horrible crimes like this.
Well, that's what our Illinois Attorney General is asking lawmakers right now to eliminate the statute of limitations for child sex crimes.
I think that's a mistake to eliminate it completely. I think to have a flexible statute of limitations that says it doesn't begin to run until the young man or woman becomes of age or something like that, an intermediate step would make more sense. Look, there are other very, very, very serious crimes that have statutes of limitations, including rape as a statute of limitations. And, if you want to eliminate all statutes of limitations, once you start eliminating some, there are going to be people who come and say, but this is a horrible crime. What about environmental pollution? That's a terrible crime. Let's eliminate the statute of limitations for that. So I think we have to have a serious debate about how to deal with statutes of limitations.
What do you say to people who look at this case and say 15 months for destroying the lives that Denny Hastert destroyed, particularly given the position that he was in? Perhaps he was compromised as a third in line to the President of the United States for the decade he served as House Speaker, incredibly. And they say, well, the sentence he got is insufficient, and it goes again to my cynicism that there are two systems of justice, one for those who have political or financial clout and another for everyone else.
Well, there's no question that there are two systems of justice. There's no question that the poor and the unrepresented don't get the kind of justice that the powerful often get. Sometimes it cuts the other way. Sometimes if you're powerful and influential and the public really, really sees you as a hypocrite, you can get an excess punishment. If this guy had been unknown, if nobody had ever heard of him, and he were being convicted of structuring payments, he probably would have gotten a lower sentence. So it's not clear how fame and power cut in a case like this. What is clear is that what this man is alleged to have done to young people is just beyond excuse. And, one hopes that in a world where there is ultimate justice, he will have to pay a heavier price than he's paid for now. But our legal system is imperfect, and it compromises, and it strikes balances between statutes of limitations and the need to do justice going back years and years and years, particularly when there are cover-ups and there are payoffs, as obviously occurred in this case. It's complicated, on balance. I think reasonable people could disagree about whether or not he got a harsher sentence than he deserved or a too harsh sentence. We're going to continue to debate this, and if it affects some changes and some improvements and has people come forward when they are abused like this, that will have served a useful purpose.
And before we let you go, I wanted to ask about a surrender date. I mean, you had Judge Durkin publicly lambast him for an hour straight, and then he said, well, come back, look at the prisons and decide when you want to surrender. Is that common?
It's fairly common to give some options, particularly for an old person who has illness, and maybe some of his doctors will have to look at the kinds of facilities he gets. Normally, you're given some time to set your matters straight, so that's not unusual. He's not running away anywhere. He's not going to bolt or violate bail, so I think that's usual.
All right, he's Alan Dershowitz, former professor at Harvard Law School, of course, renowned constitutional law scholar. Professor Dershowitz, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.